Welcome to the Modern Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Dave. I'm here with Greg, my co-host. And this week has been a lot of fun for me, Greg. I've had a really great time digging into this topic. And I was curious, Greg, before we tell everyone what we got into, what was your enjoyment level this week?
I'm giving it like an 8.
An 8?
Yeah.
Out of 20? You giving it 8 out of 20? Holy crap.
Yeah.
That's
out of 20? 4.
A 4 out of 20. Even worse. Yeah, a lot of fun. There's some weeks where the topic is more fun than others. Some weeks I literally get lost in the topic a little bit, and this week was one of them.
Really?
Just like Heaven's Gate, Jonestown.
Yeah, that's usually your area. I'm surprised you got lost in this one.
Oh, this is right up my wheelhouse, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
As the kids say.
Okay, yeah.
Right in my wheelhouse.
Kids say that all the time. Yeah. Dave, what this brought to mind for me, because I'm trying to come at this from a psychological level, and I'm not sure that that's what you were trying to do at all with this topic, but it makes me think of dialectical thinking. And when we're able to think dialectically, we can see that things can be true at the same time. Like two opposing things can be true at the same time. Like, for example, you have people who are like, my mother is making me crazy. I can't stand her right now. But also your mom loves you, right? That's dialectical thinking. Like you need to be able to see things from two sides, like getting both sides of a story. Right now, we live in a pretty polarized, right or wrong, no nuance kind of society. And I've always loved this phrase, you can't hate somebody if you know their story. So today we're going to tell the story from both sides. We're going to tell.
Is that a direct quote that you took from me?
Yeah, that's your quote.
I think I said that once too.
Okay. Like once you learned my story, you're like, oh, I don't hate you anymore.
So, the opposite of dialectic thinking, in my opinion, would be rigid thinking.
Or black and white thinking.
Or black and white thinking, which I do tend to think go hand in hand. So, you're right. This is definitely, there's involvement of that. There's also some involvement of a topic that we talk quite a bit about, power, those who have power.
Yeah.
There are entitlement, hierarchy, poverty.
Censorship.
Censorship is big here. Tons of things. So when you said you're not sure that I was coming from a psychological angle, quite the contrary. I believe this is all psychology here.
Well, listen, for someone who usually rains all over my overview because they're too long, good job extending the hell out of this one because we haven't even mentioned what we're talking about.
Yeah. So today we are talking about the campaign against gangsta rap, highlighted by the police versus rap, and B, the courts versus rap.
Right. And so obviously Delore Tucker.
Yes, Delore Tucker was a big face in that part of it. So just kind of giving a little background, this is when we're talking about the era here is the 90s.
Yeah, this is our era.
This is our era. And Greg, this is the reason why I felt strongly about this. And I think I got kind of lost in this is this. I lived rap music.
So did I.
In the 90s. Like I was that quintessential white kid who just loved everything that had nothing to do with my upbringing or my environment. And you know what? From doing this research, I was not alone. I learned an interesting fact that actually 70% of sales of gangster rap music was to young white kids.
Well, when the Chronic came out, they were selling more records than pop albums.
Yes.
And that was insane. I remember I had the Chronic.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I had no business having that. And it was just the greatest. It's still great.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about let's set the scene a little bit because, in New York, that's when people think of when hip hop started, they think of New York City.
Well, and, kind of going back to just the 90s, I also want to highlight how violent the 90s were. So there was actually, this is a startling number here. 2,000 reported homicides in New York City in 1990. 2,000. Does that sound high to you, Greg? How about if I told you that there was only 433 in 2022 in New York City?
Yeah, you know what? I think they're all happening in Chicago now. Shifted.
Maybe.
A lot over there.
So, I mean, it's a startling number. And, you know, LA was around, you know, was a very high number as well. And, you know, it's just back then it was very violent. And obviously African Americans and to a lesser extent, Latinos were more likely to be the victims in homicide at the time.
You bring up a good point, though, talking about New York, because this was and how violent it was, because this was before, like, it was happening in New York first. The music was talking about, you know, poverty and drugs, and LA was still kind of talking about having fun and meeting women and going to the beach. And even if you look at Dr. Dre's older stuff when he was with the World Class Wrecking Crew, I mean, he's wearing sequence outfits. You know, it's interesting to see. But as things start to shift and things start getting more violent in LA and gang culture, you know, I read this thing that Ice-T was quoted in saying that the gangsters, the gang members were the real stars in LA. And what he was doing with his song 6 a.m, you know that song?
Yes.
It's this, he's like just trying to document gang culture. And this song it's interesting because it's the first time you see, it's like it's story driven, and it is like it's documenting the day in the life of people in LA going like in gangs, and we see the same thing with, you know, Boys in the Hood, this kind of thing. So this is what's going on, right? Like the streets are getting a little bit tougher. And
well, here's the thing with hip hop, though, like, you know, even prior to what we would consider to be gangster rap, hip hop's always had lessons. It's always had stories, and they didn't always stray from talking about real life issues. And I think one of the greatest examples of that is Grandmaster Flash in the Furious 5, The Message. If you listen to the lyrics of that, you know, even the way it starts off, broken glass everywhere,
right?
You know, people pissing in the streets, you don't care. Like, it's all about what's going on around them and what they're living in. So, I mean, it's never been, you know, hidden, the lifestyle, you know, what their life experience is. It's just what we start to see around late 80s, early 90s is more violence in the music. There's more, you know, anger. I think is a big thing.
It's more reality, and it's more, the music itself is menacing. It feels darker, and it's just telling stories. And I think the reason that's happening is it's because the music is starting to reflect the mood in the street finally, right? And it's almost like the music is saying, hey, like, look at what's going on here.
Absolutely.
Like, look at everything that's happening here. Like, someone needs to somehow get this message across.
Yeah. So, Greg, you named a couple of obviously prominent members of what we would consider now to be gangster rap. One of the earliest members, though, or person to be considered one of the first gangster rappers, is Schoolie D, who, I'm not going to lie, like, I'm not super familiar with Schoolie D's music. I know the name. I can't say I listen to Schoolie D, but I mean, he's really, you know, credited for influencing Ice-T, who, me personally, never a huge Ice-T fan. You know, a couple of songs here and there.
More of a Lemonade guy.
Oh boy. So, but like, he is huge in the formation of gangster.
Yeah, he's a pioneer.
He really is.
You got to give him credit. And, you know, without Ice-T making the song 6 a.m, documenting this reality, you don't get NWA.
Right. Who are also huge first, like, contributors to this genre, and also influenced by Schoolie D. And for those who aren't, like, I don't know how you can not be familiar with NWA. I think even my mom could probably name some NWA members. Yeah. But for those not familiar, you know, it's Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, Ice Cube, Arabian Prince, MC Ren, and DJ Yella, who were two later members who joined. Ice Cube, though, I think he's a super important name, because when he goes solo as well, he continues, and he is definitely a heavy influence in the 90s gangster rap that we see. And he is definitely more getting into that almost like revenge type
Right.
rap, where it's a lot of like, this is how I was treated, so this is what I want to do back and stuff like that. And then you start to see some other notable names: Cypress Hill, MC Too Short, and a ton more. Prior to the big thing in '92, which you mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Dre releasing The Chronic, which then just gives gangster rap commercial appeal. So now it's not only just something that is on the streets that people are listening to. Now it's a real legitimate, like it's on the radio. Anybody has access to it. Then you got Ice Cube around the same time. Actually, Ice Cube dropped It Was a Good Day, which one of the best songs ever created.
Right.
And that just opens the door for other people to get radio play, like Snoop Dogg and everybody else who followed.
So you mentioning Ice Cube being like the catalyst for notoriety of gangster rap is so true, because Boys in the Hood was written by Ice Cube when he was in 11th grade. That's pretty impressive. Yeah. And not only did he write that song, he also wrote a song that would certainly grab the attention of the nation. Fuck the police. Fuck the police.
He wrote Fuck the Police?
Yes. That's a big one.
We're going to be probably swearing a lot in this episode. So
yeah.
Well, just be prepared a little bit of a different tone. Yeah.
I mean, neglect and frustration is the inspiration for these lyrics. I mean, look what's going on. And he even talks about, he's like, Dr. Dre keeps getting arrested, who's a good guy. I mean, Dr. Dre back then.
He's a doctor, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
He's saving lives.
He keeps getting arrested. And Ice Cube is like, there's so much violence in these streets and good guys like Dr. Dre getting arrested, and just made it feel very racial. Yeah. And he's like, fuck the police.
Yeah. Here's the part. And, this is kind of jumping ahead. So as we mentioned, it's the music has more of an angry tone. It's, it's very raw. It's very like, you feel the music when you're listening to gangster rap. I think a lot of it was met with contention because of who it targets, which are obviously law enforcement. And, there was a big issue with that, and we're going to get into that. But I think what really drew the most attention to the genre at whole, and like some of the dangers that can come along with it, are both, Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac, both being gunned down in the late 90s, just months outside of each other. And I think that really drew attention to just how dangerous things had gotten. Not going to say the music killed them, but definitely the lifestyle they started to portray. So it definitely, started in one place and then got to a totally different place, I think, by the time Biggie and Tupac were both deceased.
Yeah, interestingly enough, today I saw that there's been new developments in the Tupac murder case, as recently as today. I think that's interesting. And when you talk about the Tupac and Biggie, do you think that's, life imitating their art, or do you think that they were, people who lived this lifestyle before and and the money and the success didn't change them?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you're too familiar with, at least with Tupac's story. I couldn't tell you with Biggie, but I know a lot of it has to do with the people that he got involved with. Mm-hmm. Like, had he not gotten involved with Suge Knight, would some of that stuff happened? I don't know. And I guess that's even the same for Biggie. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, because I think it's kind of like, it's complicated.
Yeah. More money, more problems, as they say.
Sure. So I want to start this off, and I know we've already been talking, start off kind of this narrative with gangster rap versus the police. I think that this is kind of where it starts, as far as, where the first contention against gangster rap begins. So in 1989, a spokesperson for the FBI sent a one-page letter to the LA Office of Priority Records. That person's name was Milt Ulrich, I think is his name. He was this assistant director of the FBI, and he accused the NWA and Priority Records of encouraging violence and disrespect for law enforcement. And he noted that 78 officers had been killed in the line of duty in 1988. And he was referring, like, the part about disrespect and the attitude towards law enforcement. He was referring specifically to the song Fuck the Police as being like kind of the inciter for this kind of attitude towards law enforcement.
So what I think what Ice Cube was trying to get across with the song is it's not fuck the police across the nation. So this isn't like, fuck the police in the Midwest. This is in our faces, in our neighborhoods, like fuck these police for treating us the way they're treating us. Yeah. And I think instead of seeing, we had an opportunity at that point, or government did, to say, there's a real problem here in LA. Like, look at what's coming out of there. But instead it's like, they're attacking police across the country. And I don't think that's what they were doing. I think this is just coming out of frustration from their life.
Yeah. This obviously got the NWA like a ton of news coverage. So if anything, it had almost an opposite effect of what they probably were hoping for. And MC Ren, who's a member of NWA, as I mentioned, actually said, this is quote, "We were just letting everybody know that Black people was fed up with getting harassed by the police and getting beat by them." Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like you said, this is genuinely just a reflection of how they're feeling and what they're experiencing. So all this ends up making them a national sensation. And to the point where Dr. Dre actually thanks Ulrich and for writing the FBI the letter and said, "You made us a lot of money." So I kind of love that story. It's like, it totally backfires because you know what? In our society, and this has probably been true forever, a lot of times negative publicity is better than no publicity.
That's what I try to tell you when we get a bad review. It still hurts.
It still hurts. Didn't hurt them. I don't think they were too hurt by it. I think if anything, it probably got the right response, knowing that they pissed them off. So the next person that's kind of involved in this narrative is Tupac. And he is kind of infamous for having a lot of this content in his music too, giving real life experiences. Well, he actually does have a real life experience that fuels a lot of his attitude towards the police. In 1991, when he's crossing a street in downtown Oakland, and two police stop him for jaywalking and ask to see his ID. The police report reads that Tupac was hostile and angry. A month later, he goes on record and describes his encounter, stating that he was face down in the street, waking up in a gutter with cuffs and from being unconscious with blood on his face, and he was going to jail for resisting arrest when he was unconscious. So he turns around and he sues the police department for $10 million for false arrest and imprisonment. He ends up settling for $42,000. Not a bad chunk of change, but also I don't know if it necessarily makes up for that whole experience.
Right. I wonder, like, weren't Tupac's parents, or at least his mother, activists?
He does have lineage with the Black Panthers.
Right. Like this is kind of in his blood to be able to speak out against this.
Oh, absolutely. So actually, the same day he files the complaint against the Oakland police, Tupacalypse Now appears in record stores. Are you familiar with that album?
No.
All right. So it's kind of described as like a battle cry. It's like messages about poverty and violence and, just what it's like for an African-American individual living on the streets at that time. I was just listening to it today, kind of revisiting it, wanted to kind of get the sense of like what the feel was for that. And it's exactly that. It's him talking about run-ins with the police and, all that stuff. This was one of the first major rap releases for Interscope Records, which we'll talk about later because they're a major player in later campaigns against hip hop. But at the time, it didn't draw too much law enforcement attention. It just more is like, in the timeline of things that happened, this is kind of a major thing. The next year, Ice-T, who's already a prominent member, which we talked about earlier, releases, and this is crazy. Did you know about the thrash metal band?
Yes, I
album
did.
Body Count, which releases a song called Cop Killer. So this is everything's just building up at this point. So we have, the early stuff in the late 80s with hip hop. We have Tupac, kind of making it publicly known about police relations and what it's like, the violence towards people on the streets. And now we actually have Ice-T with a thrash metal band making a song called Cop Killer.
Yeah, almost taking it up a notch, which it makes me feel maybe Ice-T was trying to piggyback on the success and the genuine frustration of fuck the police. I should be saying fucked up police. That's how you say it. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that's disingenuous of Ice-T, or do you think that was
having a thrash metal band?
Having a thrash metal band and having a song called Cop Killer.
I think that he actually, I think it was genuine because I think that he dealt with a lot of police involvement. Some of his background, I think at one point he actually was a pimp. So
Okay.
I can imagine that he probably had some run-ins with the law, and I'm sure that just being an African American on the streets at that time was probably, he probably had a lot of experiences. I heard that the reason why he actually made an album with this band Body Count was because he wanted to give his buddy a chance to like play the guitar or something like that. It was like something like actually like that's not what I would have expected.
Though, to be honest, I listened to it. It's not good.
I didn't think it was too bad. I listened a little bit. I was like, it's all right. Not my type of music. So a month after it releases, though, the verdict for the Rodney King trial, another, prime example of an African American having a run-in with law enforcement and violence happening, comes out, and the police are acquitted of all charges, which ignites one of the largest race riots in history.
1992, right?
1992. Yep.
I remember this like watching this on TV, watching the city on fire. It was really something. And this influenced a lot of music. I mean, I remember Sublime songs talking about this, all kinds of. Yeah,
absolutely. Sure.
It was this was a big deal.
So,
and I think that's why, this is a little off topic, but weren't they sort of afraid that this was going to happen again with the OJ trial? Had the verdict gone a different way?
Yeah, I do believe so. I mean, I think that this has kind of been the fear of almost like every situation since then, since 92.
I mean, we've seen things like this, a couple of years ago.
More recently, for sure. Yeah, I think that we were making a lot of comparisons to 1992 at that time. So when this happens, Ice-T's name gets thrown out there again, and he becomes a very prominent figure during the riots. And, people are pointing the finger at his song Cop Killer, and for whatever reason. And he's even asked by news anchors to do something to stop the riots. And his response is to refuse and to say that if he didn't have the money he has, he couldn't answer whether he wouldn't be there or not, because he probably would. So, that's interesting that like we have this nationwide response. People are up in arms. People are feeling, there's like a lack of justice and all this and not being heard. And then we're pointing the finger at a hip hop artist and blaming his music for the attitude towards the police members who were involved. So following the riots, Ice-T's, kind of becomes a prominent figure during that. A Dallas police officer comes across the album Body Count, and because his teenage daughter's friend brought it over, and he decides he's going to put the lyrics in the police union's newsletter next to a call for boycotting Time Warner products. So he gets police to start protesting, and that gets attention from elected officials. And I think this is kind of where we see this become a bigger issue than just law enforcement versus rap. It's now getting like actual like elected officials. It's being discussed by a number of people outside of just law enforcement. The LA City Council and County Board adopted motions condemning Ice-T and the label. California Attorney General sent letters to record stores urging them to stop selling the record. The NRA promises to give legal assistance to family members of any police officer who's shot or killed if it's shown that the violence was incited by Cop Killer. 60 members of Congress signed a letter to Time Warner calling Cop Killer vile and despicable. And then Vice President Dan Quayle starts getting involved. So, I mean, this becomes huge. This song becomes huge. Ice-T says American people are really up in arms about this song, which doesn't kill. It's just a song. But the cops in America actually kill kids. This is a very angry song. It's a song about rage. They have no trouble with killing what they consider brutal kids. See, my attitude is just because you have a badge doesn't give you the right to murder me.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's just the song at all. It seems like with things we've seen, remember Black Wall Street, where the tensions were so high. Mm-hmm. It even feels like that now sometimes, where the tensions are so high, when the country's so polarized, it's almost like people are waiting for one little spark to ignite the fire. And in this case, it just happened to be the songs or the movement.
Yeah. Also, with the Black Wall Street, it's like that fear that a population that's been a minority, mm-hmm. who's lacked power, who's never really had a platform suddenly is in a place where, hey, wait, they might actually gain influence. They might actually gain power. And that's scary because their power directly impacts mine. And in this one, like, they're actually fearful. Like you said, dialectic thinking. I do think that there probably could be a sense that, like, oh my God, if everybody starts getting this attitude about like cop killer, then we're done for. Like, people are going to target us. But like, they could genuinely have fear. That's not a wrong thought, I guess, to have.
No, absolutely. We're going to be coming at this issue from both sides this whole time, because there's absolutely two ways to look at this.
Yeah.
Throughout. I mean, does this music promote violence? Kinda. Yeah. Does it promote misogyny and, mistreatment of women? Yeah. I think that those things are there. Does that mean that it's this music's fault for the things that are happening in the backlash? No, it's just music. People make their own decisions. We're not there. Yeah, you're right. I don't even think we have enough to answer these big questions yet.
So, just kind of wrapping up the Ice-T angle here. So initially Time Warner defended Ice-T. They defended the song. They said that the song Cop Killer was more of a shout of pain and protest. And they asked why critics couldn't hear what the rap is trying to tell us, which I think is a really actually reasonable request on Time Warner. But with the ongoing protests, and they even got bigger involvement from, names like Carlton Heston, and other people,
you're right with Charlton.
Is Charlton Heston? Okay. Ice-T eventually gives in. He re-releases the album Cop Killer without Cop Killer. And then he ends up leaving that label. The ironic thing is, during the entire battle of Cop Killer, not one incident could actually be tracked down to claim that any violence was incited by Ice-T or that song. There's no evidence it's all fear.
Right. I mean, it'd be tough to prove anyway.
There's actually no evidence to prove that any rap song has incited violence until now, until this story. So Ronald Ray Howard was a teenager he was a small-time drug dealer. He was driving a stolen car in Houston, and he's pulled over by an officer, Bill Davidson, on April 11th, 1992, on a highway in South Texas. When he's pulled over, he pulls out a gun and shoots Davidson, who ends up dying 3 days later. Part of his defense was that he was listening to Tupac's album, Tupacalypse Now, and particularly the song Soldier's Story. This then takes all the spotlight off Ice-T. Suddenly no one's concerned about Ice-T, and it's all Tupac. Dan Quayle demands that Time Warner pulls Tupacalypse Now from stores. It's so crazy to think about, these politicians, these all this attention is being brought to albums, and they're demanding that feels like such a different time than nowadays. Anything can kind of come out, and I feel like nobody.
Well, I mean, you say that, but it's we are just as apt to kind of shut things down for different reasons.
Sure.
The way it makes people feel, which I'm not sure if that's any better, but yeah, you're right. Getting rid of the album because that incident it's all right, then wipe the shelves of every movie that's ever had violence in it, every cowboy song, or every John Wayne movie that I used to watch with my dad. That's all got violence in it. It's just every book, you can't do that.
No, you can't. I mean,
burning books. It's the same sentiment, and
it does happen. It does happen over time. And the reason why I wanted to do this in particular is because, obviously, this was something that I remember pretty well. But this is a repeated thing throughout time, just with different medias and genres and stuff like that. So I feel like it's important that we do look at these things and say, why this one? And, maybe another time we can look at another one and say, why that one? This Howard guy said that Tupac's song was so intoxicating, it had driven him to murder. And he told a reporter, this is a quote, that the music was up as loud as it could go with gunshots and siren noises on it. And my heart was pounding hard. I was so hyped up, I just snapped.
Yeah.
Guess what?
What?
Didn't hold up in court. He was sentenced to death, executed years later. However, the defense sparked the argument against music influencing this behavior. And this is kind of when we really start to get some legs to this argument. And then you start to, as always, you start to hear it again and again. So in 95, this is what if 3 years later, another lawyer tries to blame rap defense after 2 Milwaukee teenagers shot and killed a police officer. This time they were using Tupac's guest verse on a song called South Central Cartel. The attorney.
So, I mean, it doesn't really. What if the content doesn't matter? Like, it could be anything that makes you feel murderous.
Right.
What about people that have, what about people like watching Martha Stewart, like just on the most mundane thing, and that makes them murderous, or listening to
all
people
jazzed up.
Yeah. What about the people who have dreams and that incites them to murder someone? Like, I remember this case where someone dreamed their wife cheated on him. I mean, you can't cancel dreams. There's always going to be something that influences people to do the wrong thing,
right?
But
don't you think that like the arguments start to make sense though, because like you're looking for a scapegoat, so of course you're going to start to build these arguments. Like,
well, you're gonna look for those arguments if you have incentive to get rid of that already. Like, if that's already at your agenda, you're gonna look for opportunities to make your case. Like, people who are already against gangster rap and already afraid of what it will do to society, just like people were afraid of what Elvis was going to do to society, or what, in our generation, what video games or the internet's going to do to society. They're already against that. So anything they can find as proof or anything that solidifies their opinion, they're going to lean into it and bring it to the forefront.
Yeah. So the attorney's argument was that the violent anti-police lyrics appeared to have acted as command hallucinations, which influenced his behavior. Again, didn't work. Both teens convicted to long-term prison sentences.
I wonder if there's any mental illness there. Obviously, there's some, right? I mean,
I don't know.
Command hallucinations. This sounds like schizophrenia to me.
In a later court hearing with Tupac, there's a back and forth, which I found to be kind of like perfect Tupac. So the attorney says, was it your intention to get young Black people to be violent towards police? He says, no. The attorney then says, were you trying to provoke anybody to do anything in particular? And he says, yes. And the attorney says, what? He goes, think, use your head. That's all he's trying to do. Provoke thoughts.
Right. That's all we're trying to do here. Right? I think.
Yes. So, Greg, now we can go back to that question, I think, because we have a few examples of times where this has been highlighted or this discussion has happened. And do you think music can fuel an attitude towards police, or do you think the music is actually reflecting the already existing attitude towards the police?
So both those things. Yes. I think that the music can fuel. We'd be lying if we said that music in some instances did not fuel the want for violence against the police. Now, music can also make you feel like you want to make love to the woman sitting next to you. But as a human being, you have a choice to either stay within the law and not violate people's humanity just because some music made you feel a certain way. Like, music is supposed to shift your emotions. It's supposed to make you feel mad, happy, sad. It's doing its job. That's what music does.
Sure.
But your choices, those remain your own. A song can make you feel like doing something. It can make you think like you want to do something. But if you do something, that's only on you. That's your choice.
I agree. And you know what? I think it's important for any person with any kind of celebrity, any kind of, power, to understand that when you have a certain status, people will look at you in a certain light. They will maybe try to emulate you. They will admire you. So your attitudes towards certain things can be influential. Mm-hmm. Humans tend to look for influences in art, so that's music, movies, whatever. So sometimes that attitude can be passed on to the listeners. I do feel that to be true. I do think that the music's important because it was reflecting the experiences that were happening at that time. And I think that it was an important form of art. But I do also think that it could exacerbate the already existing issues. But the point of the music is to highlight the violence happening towards them.
Yeah, it's almost
and their feelings about the violence. It's not about let's all go kill the cops.
Right. No, these songs have almost become, in my mind, like important historical documents in a sense.
Sure.
Where they are, precursors to, almost like harbingers of some pending doom. And they were. It was like they were telling you, do something about this, pay some attention to this, or April 26, 1992 is going to happen, the riots.
Yeah.
And I think it was the 26th. But I think that's how important this music was.
This music to me is highlights everything that was wrong about 2000s hip hop, which literally felt like you were just listening to people talk. Well, even current day a little bit, but not. I feel like it's getting better with some of it, but it does feel like you're just listening to people literally talk about money, violence, sex.
It's like
there's no purpose behind it. There's no storytelling. Like I remember like listening to Wu-Tang, Mobb Deep. You felt like you were listening to a story about what they were doing in their day, like the situations they were getting in. It felt like an experience.
That's the greatest part about it. It's story-based music.
Yeah. Like Slick Rick is literally a storyteller. Slick Rick literally it's like children's story, one of his songs. It's literally him telling a story. It's the best,
I think this music is also reminiscent. It just happens over and over again. Like in the 60s, people singing about peace during Vietnam, they were asking for attention. Like, hey, look, this isn't the best. Like Vietnam isn't the best idea. Like we shouldn't be doing this. And no one listened. And look, it wasn't. Lots of people died unnecessarily, and it didn't work out for us at all.
Absolutely.
It's important.
Yeah.
So should we talk about what we came here to talk about?
Well, we are.
Well, to me, like the most important, this figure, C. Dolores Tucker, is interesting because she was an activist. She's an African-American activist. And when I first heard this story, and I remember this when this was happening, and there was this, all I knew was like there was this old lady, sort of like this angry church lady who was against the music that I was really fond of. And that's all I really knew of her. Now, what was your sense of her when this was going on?
I associated it with every, politician at the time that just seemed way out of grasp of what was, going on in that moment.
So that's not exactly what was going on. This woman is the real deal. She marched alongside Dr. King in Selma.
Yeah.
I mean, she formed the African American Women for Reproductive Freedom. She's responsible for the governor's appointment of African American seats in government, including judgeships. Like she did this. She was the first African American woman to be Secretary of State in Pennsylvania. So this is like, she's just not some woman who is, I don't know, complaining about the way things were. Like her arguments were kind of sound. She was saying that the music is, offensive to women and promoted drugs and violence. And I don't know, it didn't do that. So she was being parental in a sense. So maybe she felt like, this is what I think where she was coming from too. She had fought for this platform with Dr. King, where he felt that violence wasn't the answer and hate wasn't the answer. And they worked so hard to finally get a voice. And I think she had the sense, we finally have a platform, and this is how you're going to use it. You're going to talk about drugs and sex and violence. It's just, maybe she was disappointed.
Well, and she's not the first person to come out with this mentality. In the early 90s, it was Reverend Calvin Budds, who was an advocate for inner city Black neighborhoods. And he campaigned, initially starting with like cigarettes and liquor, but then it was against targeting violent and misogynistic rap in the early 90s, starting with like NWA, Two Live Crew, Ghetto Boys, calling them all filth. He actually took 100 of his followers to a sidewalk near his church to destroy rap cassettes with a steamroller.
Cassettes.
But they were met with rap fans in protest. So instead, he calls it off and he brings them to Midtown Manhattan, where they drop them all off at the Sony headquarters. And some of the members start stomping on him to destroy them, to kind of send a message.
So that the voice of that minister that you're talking about is in the beginning of the song Thuggish Ruggish Bone.
Yes. We're not against rap. We're not against rappers, but we are against those thugs. That's one of my favorite songs. So I love that part.
Yeah, it's great.
This attitude, so it's not only C. Dolores Tucker, which was new to me to kind of hear like where that started. And he actually states he was a fan of rap and he felt it was an important, artistic expression, but he didn't like the type of rap that was coming out at this time that dehumanizes people and turns people into sexual objects or threatens the moral fabric of America. And I think that's somewhat of what C. Dolores Tucker and some of the people that are going to get involved with her kind of were going for.
Absolutely. And then maybe in some instances she was wrong. Maybe she was wrong to shame all the record companies to stop producing music because it's taking away the freedoms. And it's also telling these people, all right, go back to the street, or in a sense, it's closing Black-owned businesses. And isn't that what she was fighting for? So these rappers, they weren't, maybe it's so difficult to say because you can see it from both ways, but what they were doing was they're trying to bring awareness to systemic issues. But what I think was wrong on their side is the quotes. Like Dolores Tucker's in tons of rap music, from Tupac to Lil Wayne to Eminem, suck this and, whatever. We don't need to be crass, but they're saying things about this woman, a woman who hangs out with Rosa Parks and Maya Angelou and
and this is just my opinion, take it for what it's worth. Tupac, I feel maybe had a leg to stand on with his, his
comment wasn't that bad though. His comment,
he basically is just, he calls her an MFer and whatnot.
MFer is light compared to what other people are saying.
Just Eminem. Eminem had said the worst, and he probably has the least leg to stand on in the whole. So I kind of like dismiss what his comment. I think her quote's interesting. So she states, "What do you think Dr. King would have to say about rappers calling Black women bitches and whores? About rappers glorifying thugs and drug dealers and rapists? What kind of role models are those for young children living in the ghetto?" I mean, this to me highlights what she's trying to fight for here.
Right. And doesn't she deserve some sort of reverence? I mean, she is an icon for, activism.
Yeah.
So I don't know. To me, it's complicated, and we'll go a little bit further.
I think what ends up happening though is like she sort of goes off the rails.
Right.
Like and her character, there was some things about her background that also like bring her character into question. There's this idea about her that maybe sometimes she's trying to take credit for things, she's misrepresenting herself, or she's misrepresenting her true intentions. And I think that starts to come off in some ways in this as well. But one of the things that she does, like when she's at a subcommittee hearing, she states that gangster rap is turning children into social time bombs, and America's rap battle youth will trigger a crime wave of epidemic proportions of which we've never seen the likes of. So she's really trying to instill fear in everybody of what this music is going to do. And then she reads a letter from a prisoner who starts to talk about how rap music kind of influenced his behavior, and seeing music videos and how easy it was for all of them in the videos. It like, he felt like he had to emulate this lifestyle if he ever wanted to be somebody. He had to live like that.
That just feels like another politician pushing their
point.
And
also there's question of whether that, letter is even real. Yeah.
Right. So what's interesting is Suge Knight enters the story with Dolores, which, he's always seen as the villain. But in this case, I think he kind of exposes her a little bit. So Dolores wants to talk to Suge Knight because she thinks maybe she can offer him a chance to make a label with her. She brings Dionne Warwick, talking about being a little bit out of touch. Like Suge Knight's going to be interested in that. So Suge Knight takes the meeting because he thinks he's, call him what you will, but he's a great marketer. And he thinks this will be good exposure. So he takes the meeting. He sues her for extortion. And he gets private investigators to uncover things about her that maybe she doesn't want people to know. Like she is a slumlord in a sense. Like she owns a bunch of buildings. They're not in great shape. And also he makes this great quote where he talks about she's exaggerating her education a little bit because she has these honorary doctorates. So she calls herself a doctor. And he says that, quote, she's no more of a doctor than Dr. Dre, which I think is just kind of awesome. Right. So, I mean, it's, what they say. Like,
but you also have to remember your source here.
Right. People in glass houses though, too. Right. If you have, you can't pretend to be this righteous person if you've got some skeletons in your closet, especially if those skeletons are living in literal closets in your slums that you, I mean, and she was going to crush their businesses because that's essentially what they are. And they're going to end up back in those buildings. I don't know. There is definitely two sides to this little tale here.
Yeah, for sure.
And she represents that older generation, which we are becoming, Dave, saying, well, this gangster rap, this is going to ruin everything. Just like what I was saying before, these video games are going to ruin it. Right now, maybe we're saying AI is going to ruin everything. And I'm sitting here and I literally believe that. And am I just being the old guard is ending? Like, what do you think?
So the thing that actually spawned the meeting with C. Dolores Tucker and Suge Knight was an initial win on C. Dolores Tucker's end, where she was able to actually spawn some change with Time Warner and their deal with Interscope Records, and that was positive for her. But that was very short lived, because shortly after, Time Warner, who had fired a guy named Doug Morris, who actually had started the Interscope Records deal, and he ends up taking a job running MCA Records. And Greg, MCA Records is kind of a big deal because they have been renamed Universal Music Group today. But 9 months after the sale, the top 4 slots in Billboard album charts belong to Bush, No Doubt, Snoop Doggy Dogg, and Tupac, all Interscope artists. Mm-hmm. So,
you know what's the interesting thing is, like, it's white owned. Interscope is white owned.
Sure.
Which is, in the end, right?
Yeah.
So all this, I don't know. So we've heard both sides of the story here, I think, quite a bit. Now, who do you think was right? Who would you stand with? C. Dolores Tucker or?
So I think that there's truth in both sides. I think her initial blanket argument is valid. I think that there are some things that start to, tap into the integrity of society and humans. I think, if we are constantly glorifying sex and violence and, mistreatment of individuals and stuff like that, there's no way that's not going to seep into society. It's going to seep into the train of thought of kids and, adults, so, I'm sure as well. It does start to shift our culture, which it has, without a doubt. It definitely has changed our attitudes about certain things, whether that's for the better or the worse. I mean, it kind of depends on your viewpoint and how you choose to live your life and the way you view others. But I think there is something to what she's saying. I just don't know that she was able to kind of see the other side of the argument at all. And I think she was very rigid, and I don't think she was able to see that some of the things she was fighting against were people just who had gone through some terrible experiences, and they wanted, like we had talked about with, the initial conversation about the police. So I don't know. I think there's some takeaways on her end, but ultimately I think the way that she went about it, trying to ruin gangster rap, I don't think I don't agree with that.
So ultimately, I think she was wrong too. I think you'd have to think about, why are they talking about this stuff? Why are they speaking this way? This was the environment they were put in. They didn't ask to be in. It was the circumstances of systemic, racism for one thing, and just political, just bad politics and bad treatment. And so these people were put in these positions, and what she's doing is wrong because the system created the anger and violence, and she's in a sense fighting the wrong fight. She's going to keep down these people who are marginalized and mistreated, and not give them a chance to come up. And that's what she was fighting for her entire life. So it's almost like she marched against herself, people like her, decades before this. That's the sense that I get. Like, she had lost touch with what it felt like to be on that side of things, the marginalized.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Corruption, the political corruption, I guess, is the word I was looking for over there.
There was a writer for a magazine called The Source, which is a hip hop magazine. Her name's Kieran Mayo, and she had a lot of like views. Like she's obviously into hip hop, but she also didn't necessarily align with like the misogyny and some of the over sexualized like attitudes towards women. So she had the idea to like interview C. Dolores Tucker for the magazine, which is, that's a weird platform for her when she's arguing against a lot of the things they're highlighting in the magazine. But she wanted to be able to give her, a platform and kind of see her point and see where there might be some connects. Not everything has to be a disagreement. I think the way that she was approaching it sounded really level-headed. What ends up happening, though, is Tucker ends up describing gangsta rap as part of a huge conspiracy. And she basically says that the record companies are programming listeners to say that we are not people, meaning I guess women, or maybe even African American women or African Americans in general. And then when the man comes to exterminate us and put us in concentration camps, the white kids are going to be happy about it, is what Tucker says. So
okay.
Yeah.
Went off the rails a little bit there.
She claimed that the first of these concentration camps had actually already been built in New Orleans. So I'm assuming she's meaning projects of sorts, but I mean, projects aren't new at this time. So I don't necessarily know exactly what she is talking about then. And, the interviewer Mayo's takeaway was that Tucker was just ignorant of hip hop in general. Like maybe she was arguing against some stuff she didn't really understand, and that she was still hung up on the civil rights struggles of the 60s. So kind of like this idea that like she's not really even sure what she is fighting against at this point. And she's seeing gangster rap as cause and not an effect, which is the argument that we've been kind of talking about this whole time.
Right. So I think that what we learned from this is, polarization, people being so divided and not being able to find some common ground and really talk to work things out is a problem in the 90s. It's a problem in 2000s. It's a problem now. And until we start trying to look through each other's perspective and point of view, we're never going to find any common ground. We're always going to be sort of divided this way.
Yeah. So, I mean, some things that this highlights for me is honestly what starts to happen when we do actually get maybe a too close of a glimpse into what it's like for people who are struggling, people who are mistreated, people who are ostracized, people who are, really othered. It scares people. It really makes people want to turn a blind eye and they can't. So then they try to get rid of it. I mean, is this what we're talking about today with banning books, with people really refusing to look at real history?
We're talking about this, and we're talking about there's of course there's a spectrum of it. We're talking about that end of things. We're talking about, comedians not being able to tell certain jokes because it's just, we're talking about all this stuff where it's like, I don't think censorship is the answer. There's a reason why people are saying the things they're saying. And if they're saying something and it's really offensive, we need to look and see like where is this coming from? Like, what is this trying to, what can we learn about this? Is there any truth to this? Instead of just immediately like getting rid of it, like what's going on here? Ask questions instead of shutting things down, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's always going to be complicated.
Yeah.
Always. I think that, if we learn anything about government, we are polarized intentionally in a lot of ways, just like you were talking about. When you were talking about Black Wall Street, it's groups have to be at odds with each other so that we can't all be together and saying, look, I don't like that there's 4 people in America that with all the money, it's like we kind of have to be polarized so that the status quo can carry on. I think that's just how we're governed. It's
in some ways though, like I think time corrects things. So in some ways, some of her campaign has actually fixed itself. Like music has definitely moved away from that. I wouldn't say necessarily the sexuality of it, but like them dehumanizing attitudes towards women. I would say that it's come a long way. I know there's still some hip hop that, maybe doesn't reflect that, but a lot, for the most part, most of it does. Like, you can't really get away with saying a lot of, like, when you listen to 90s hip hop, there is some, if you actually listen to the lyrics, it's like, wow, imagine saying that today.
Yeah.
Dude, listen to DMX and, you know, talking about in a time where, let's just say, the LGBTQ community would not approve of most DMX songs. But I think also, you know, it's kind of taking attitude of the time into consideration. Not that that excuses it whatsoever, but I guess that gives it some life still, and why people are able to still listen to it and not pass too much judgment. But it's like, wow, imagine that coming out today. That ain't happening.
That ain't happening. No. Wow, Dave, you did your due diligence on this one, huh, buddy?
Yeah, for sure.
I can picture little Dave, you know, going with the what did that little sticker say? Parental advisory, explicit lyrics. I mean,
that doesn't exist anymore, does it? Yeah, I guess it still does, but I mean, that was the thing.
Do CDs exist anymore? That's the
people don't understand going to a record store and having to give an ID to show you are a certain age in order to buy that record, that CD, that cassette.
What a feeling.
People don't know that.
No, you just have to send your parents who are completely oblivious to, you know, what was going to be on that. I remember that. Literally,
if a kid wants to listen to something, they just put it on YouTube.
Yeah, they can find anything they want on YouTube. I'm finding that out.
Yeah. There's no such thing as like not being able to have access to something that doesn't exist anymore. That was a thing. Like, I really want that album, but I can't get it because I can't buy it at the store because they're going to ID me. Like, that doesn't exist.
So, like, in a way, things have gotten better, but in a way, they've gotten worse. Like, I think that gangsta rap is tame compared to a lot of things I see on YouTube, where it's like, oh, you know, like and subscribe, or your family's gonna get murdered by Peppa Pig. You know, this is what we have to deal with now. That's frightening. You know,
I'm not too familiar with that one, but all right.
Man, let me tell you. But the Momo challenge, you don't remember that?
Yeah. Yep.
That's some dark stuff.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. If you've made it this far, if you found our journey into gangster rap somewhat interesting, we appreciate you listening. Be interesting to hear your views on our takes of this, or your own takes of, you know, the gangster rap campaigns at that time and all that stuff. So if you feel compelled, please drop us a line and let us know what you think. And we will be back next week. We appreciate all the new listeners that we've obtained over the last couple of weeks. There's definitely been a nice little uptick in new listeners. So we appreciate you, and we hope that you're enjoying. And for those who have been sticking around and listening regularly or catching up every now and then, we always appreciate you. So thank you so much. All right, everybody, have a great night, great day, great week, great month, great life if we never hear from you again. If you
might as well. See you later.